Okay, I want to discuss a very important issue, which is integration and the whole concept of integration in societies. I'm particularly thinking of Western societies here because that is a very pertinent issue in our multicultural and diverse societies. It's something that's I feel very important to discuss. I've probably touched on this before, but I do think it's a very important issue. And with Brexit, a lot of issues around national identity and all these sort of things around social cohesion is going to come back to the fore. So I want to just share my take on this. Excuse me a bit. Hmm. I've never had hay fever, but I guess that's a bit dusty around here. Anyway, okay, integration. What do we mean by integration? Well, really, it just means accepting and endorsing the culture that you're living in. I would say that's the most basic definition of it. Without wanting to write a thesis, that would be the most basic definition of integration. There's that old saying, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. And to a large extent, I agree with it because I think that I take a very dim view of anyone who goes to any country and expects everything to be just like home or doesn't make any conscious effort to kind of adapt to local customs to integrate. Um, and I feel there are too many people, frankly, who come to this country and don't accept our values, but also just don't really bring themselves into society. They kind of make these micro versions of their own country, and I find that problematic. Now, before I'm misunderstood, I want to make something very clear. I think a healthy level of diversity is a good thing. I certainly don't want an all white society. I mean, that's the sort of realm that white supremacists and so on get into, which I obviously totally reject. And a country like Britain, which has a trading history, which has an imperial history, is diverse by history. So when people say, "Oh, there's too many foreigners here," or this, that, or the other, they're ignoring the fact that we colonized the world, so we can't really complain that people then came back, the Windrush generation and so on. So the reason we're diverse today is in large part because of the empire. That's just a fact. So I think there's a difference between healthy diversity, or let me put it this way, integrated diversity versus excessive multiculturalism. To me, multiculturalism is different cultures, and you cannot question different cultures because that would be racist. It's a very politically correct, in my view, regressive thing in its. And I admit I've changed over the years on this. When I was much younger, I thought, oh, it's a wonderful thing. Lots of different cultures. It's fascinating, and I was a bit naive about it, to be completely honest. Um, Diversity, though, to me, diversity is a society where you recognize there are different cultures, but people also amalgamate with British culture, with the mainstream. So, for example, we have Kumbela festivals across the country. We have the Notting Hill Carnival. We have St. Patrick's Day. We have Chinese New Year festivities. We have all those things. And I would absolutely advocate keeping those things. I think that's great. But the point is, Irish Britons, Chinese Britons, British Indians, British Pakistanis, many of them do integrate. Many of them are, they take part in society. They speak a fluent level of English. And that's, so there is not a threat simply having diversity to integration. But I think the principle of multiculturalism is in polar opposite to it. If you take multiculturalism to its extreme, then people can't integrate. And what I find utterly infuriating is how certain liberals and people on the left have this knee jerk reaction when you insist that integration is important. They say, oh, you're pandering to the far right, or you're a racist. Not at all. I think you can have a healthy level of diversity mixed with integration. So, for example, someone who is celebrating Chinese New Year or a Kumbh Mela festival or Eid al Fitr or wherever it would be, but they also feel proud to be British. They also feel proud to fly the British flag, support Team GB during the Olympics, and so on. Those are examples of. But the uncomfortable elephant in the room is the fact that there are people who come to this country. They don't even attempt to speak English, and especially in the case of those from Islamic countries, in the extreme cases, they absolutely don't endorse our values. Because you have men, for example, thinking there was a case somewhere in the Midlands, I forget, I think it was Stoke-on-Trent, I can't remember exactly, but he threw acid in his wife's face because she dishonoured him. And this sort of thing is not like shocking single examples. This actually happens quite a lot. When you get young women disappearing from Bradford, ending up dead in rural Pakistan, that is where integration is not being insisted upon. It is not, we have to say, Sharia law has no place in this country. We have to say that so called honour killings are nothing to do with honour, they're called blood and murder. And those who cannot accept that don't belong in this country. The regressive left and the gutless liberals who say that who claim to be about liberal values and are silent on this, I think it's unforgivable. I really have no respect for that sort of moral cowardice because they would much rather shout racism and try to silence people and actually deal with issues that are happening. And I still maintain that one reason the grooming scandal in northern English towns wasn't dealt with properly was, and this was stated actually as a reason, that the authorities feared being called racist if they acted on it. And of course, it doesn't mean that all paedophiles are British Pakistani. And of course, it doesn't mean that all British Pakistanis are paedophiles. It just meant that there was a specific problem going on in those towns. So I think with an increasing population, we're 66 million now. We may hit 70 million. And, we are actually the world's 22nd most populated country, but 79th in terms of area. So you could say we are overpopulated. We are a densely populated country. We're an urban society. I believe it's just over 50% of British people live in cities and large towns. So there are very demographic shifts happening. And it infuriates me when the likes of the Green Party and others, they hear the word immigration or immigration control rather, and they feel racism. That you can't reason with these people. You can't have an adult civilized debate with them because they will always. I saw, I think it was Caroline Lucas at that time, and talking about the 2017 general election, and they all rounded on the guy from UKIP. Now, I don't support UKIP. I don't like UKIP. But he was the only one talking about immigration control. I'm not going to vote for UKIP. There's a lot of areas I disagree with them on. But until mainstream parties accept that, I mean, the Liberal Democrats and Labour, Nick Clegg and Ed Miliband, when he was leader, to some extent, kind of addressed this, but it was kind of half-hearted. The Green Party won't. The Green Party believe in open door immigration, which is insane. The Tories do to some extent, but it's a case of recognizing that there has to be controls. I don't believe immigration is entirely bad. I would agree with, I think Michael Gove said there is good immigration and bad immigration. It might be Nick Clegg actually. I agree with that. But the problem is too many people are still stigmatized if they simply mention concerns over levels of immigration. That is wrong. Only in Western countries do you get this situation. You definitely wouldn't get it in other parts of the world where if people mention concerns about immigration, they're branded racist. It's a uniquely Western thing. And It is true that there are some pretty unpleasant aspects that are genuinely far right. And I do believe the far right exists. I do believe there's far right ideology out there. People who say there isn't are being very naive. But I think they are galvanized when polite society, when centrists, when liberals will not talk about these things. So integration to me, it's not just obeying the laws. That's fine, and obviously we want people to obey the laws. But to me, honestly, it's not enough. Not in the current situation. I think, I mean, that's okay for short time. Okay, I'll rephrase that. I think it's okay if someone's coming like on holiday or they're a short term student or something like that. But if someone wants to settle here, simply obeying laws isn't enough. They need to speak a reasonable level of English, and they need to absolutely accept our values, which include freedom of expression, gender equality, and acceptance that gay people are in society. Doesn't mean you have to go and attend pride events, but those are all basic things. And if people can't accept those things, then they shouldn't be given the green light to come here. I think that questions about, when people are asked questions about when they want to settle in the UK, yeah, laws are an important one, but it should also be about attitudes. And I don't know if those questionnaires that the Home Office sets actually bring about questions about. I mean, honestly, they're asking people about different kinds of judges and different. Most British people probably don't know that. I think maybe the focus is on the wrong things. I think the focus should be on cultural attitudes. And anyone who thinks that blasphemers should be punished, I don't think they should be here. Because freedom to criticize religion is absolutely one of the things that we must stand up for. I agree that British values is a bit of a vague term, but surely we can accept that in a secular democracy, freedom to criticize religion is given. So, someone who comes from a conservative Islamic state where they believe that blasphemers should be violently punished, they should not be allowed to come to this country. And if, their background should be checked out for stuff like that to see what their attitudes are, to see what sort of family they're coming from. These are legitimate questions. I'm not talking about, dragging someone into a room and interrogating them for 10 hours. I'm just talking about reasonable, common sense evaluations. Now, the thing about English is obviously important for communication reasons. If someone can't speak a reasonable level of English, they're going to find it very hard, but also people won't be able to, talk with them. And there is a caveat to this. I hold the same principle to Britons who go to other countries. So people are saying, oh, but you're British. And they'll point to, for example, British expats who never speak the local language, who don't. I mean, I would say there's Britons in Spain who don't integrate into Spanish culture, and I can understand Spaniards being tired of them. Um, and there are British tourists who are very badly behaved, and they're embarrassing. Don't get me started on British football hooligans. So, I'm consistent on this. I say exactly the same thing. Britons going abroad should obey the laws in those countries, even even silly laws like the les majest in Thailand. I would say obey them. I think they're brutal laws. I think they're absurd. But put it this way: if I went to Thailand, I would obey it. I think you could disagree with the law, but still obey it for practical reasons. Um, and absolutely, one thing we should not be tolerating at all is people who come to this country and use their tolerance against us. And it's happened far too many times. People, for example, who think that they can make angry protests about the biased BBC against coverage of something going on in their country, or, to basically praise a hostile foreign government. We should be making it very clear, for example, to Chinese nationals that aggressive Chinese communism isn't tolerated here. But frankly, I think successive governments are just too weak. They just will not speak out on these things. And it sickens me, to be honest. I mean, right now we've given a license to CGTN. Maybe I'm getting a bit derailed here, but it's all relevant, to operate their propaganda from London. This is a network that airs forced confessions. There are too many people who use Western tolerance and say, "Oh well, freedom of speech, so that means I can insult your country, um, you know, burn your flag and do all sorts of things because it's freedom of speech." So I think they're using our freedom of expression against us. I think I would honestly say that because this issue is so important of integration, people, one way to be accepted into this country long term should be a proven affinity for this country. I'm not saying people have to grovel at British flags, certainly not, but at least they should have affection for this country, real affection. I don't think people should be coming here just because it's work and it's convenient or it's if people don't have affection for this country, they shouldn't be here. That doesn't mean they have to agree with the government. It doesn't mean that they have to like everything in the country. That would be silly. But they have to have a basic affection for the country if they want to be here long term. Because if they don't, what is it? It's just a regressive attitude that we don't need. That is not integrating. That's saying, oh, I want to come to this country. I want to use all the facilities in this country, but I don't really like this country. And I'm going to always complain about it. And I'm going to act the victim. I have no time for that. Because I maintain that Western countries are probably the most tolerant in the world overall. Sure, there are racist bigots. Sure, there are some unpleasant people. But overall, I don't think you will find a higher level of tolerance anywhere than in Western democracies if you look at the overall picture. And no, I'm not saying that other countries aren't tolerant. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying the overall situation, when you look at everything, when you look at laws, when you look at freedom of expression, when you look at all those things, other countries are welcoming, but they are incredibly insistent on respecting their values. You go to an Asian country and break the laws, you'll get a very lengthy prison sentence, or you'll be deported. Or, if you show disrespect, and that's the laws. But people come here and they disrespect us. I'll give an example. That Chinese journalist Kong Ling Lin, who made the rant in Birmingham, why the hell was she not deported the next day? That's what I'd like to know. So in areas like that, it infuriates me how weak we are and how passive and apathetic we are. That just indicated to me we're allowing ourselves to be pushed around by Beijing. It's only one example, but she should have been deported the next day, and to hell with whatever protests the Chinese embassy came out with. Make it clear to them they're in our country, they obey our laws. I think that, frankly, we're just too tolerant. Now, of course, the other side to this is that you can't expect people to integrate and to kind of endorse wider society if these dickhead racists are making life hard for them. So I will always stand up for international friends against some drunk on a train, against some idiot that's making them feel unwelcome. And it does happen. And I have no respect or time for those people. That's why I've such utter contempt for football hooligans, because very often racism does come into it. There is a very ugly jingoism about football yobbery. Um, so I believe I am consistent. I don't believe I'm some sort of nationalist that is making all the demands against people coming into this country, but you know, I know for a fact that I have personally made people feel welcome. I've even shown them around my city. I've I've done what I feel is, I've treated people the way I would like to be treated. Anyone who's ever traveled in a foreign country knows that you need to be quite assertive. And it's exciting, but it can also be a little bit daunting, especially if it's a very different culture a long way from home. So for that reason, I always try to make people feel welcome. But I also believe that comes with respecting the host nation. And too many people, frankly, come to the West, they don't respect our values, they don't integrate. So, if you come to a Western country and you just want to, you know, hang out with people from your own country, you just want to um, build little communities based on your own culture, that to me is indicating that you are not only not integrating, but you're actually hostile to the host nation. There's nothing wrong with those, you know, having diversity. There's nothing wrong with those things in itself, but there is something wrong if you're only endorsing those things. So, for example, you come to London or Birmingham or Leeds or another big city, and you only speak to people from your own country in your own language. You only go to events and cultural things that are connected with your own culture, and you constantly say how homesick you are and how terrible it all is. Well, frankly, don't turn around and complain the British are unwelcoming if you're not making any effort. I do say that those British racists, so, that's why they need to be confronted, because they're making integration hard for people. So I do understand it works both ways. But I have come across people directly that have a clearly bad attitude and have no time for it. They cannot turn around and play the victim if they're not making efforts. And this also applies to Britons. You can't go to another country and always speak English. Whenever I've traveled, when I was in China, I'm okay, my Chinese is sloppy, but I did try, and that's the point. If I see someone trying English, I will understand that they are trying, and that's what matters. English is a difficult language. So no one can learn English over a couple of months. It does take time, and we need to understand that. But as long as they're trying, then I say, well done to them. They're trying their best. And as long as they're obeying laws, obviously, but this is also fundamentally about attitudes. And until we can have a candid discussion about this, then I do see real problems arising. I'm not anti into immigration at all. I think that controlled immigration can be a good thing. Definitely, the numbers need to come down. It should be in tens of thousands per year as opposed to hundreds of thousands. Also, bear in mind Britons leave the country, but being pro integration is not being anti diversity. It's saying that extreme multiculturalism is a problem. Let me know your thoughts. This is an important subject, and I think it's going to become very relevant in coming years. But I just think if you come to a country, you need to respect your host nation. If you're not integrating, if you aren't endorsing the local culture, if you're not trying to speak English, doesn't have to be perfect, but at least try. Then you can't play the victim. You can't complain that the British are unwelcoming. Most British people are decent people. Most British people are not hardcore racists. And those people, they are out there and they're embarrassing. And I, for one, will be speaking out against them. But people who come here also have a responsibility. And I'll make one last point. It is true, I know, for example, in the case of students, they do pay a lot of money. So the actual way to get into the UK is not as simple as people think it is. There is quite a lot of paperwork, but I wonder, is it focused on the right things? And it's expensive as well. British visas, as I understand it, are very expensive. But are those questions focused on the right things? I mean, for example, knowing constitutional history, it's good, but I think more important questions have to be about values. They have to be. If someone believes that blasphemers should be violently punished, if someone believes that the BBC cannot question the Chinese state, like some Chinese nationalist comes here and wants to have a protest outside the BBC, technically it might be their right, but they need to be challenged and they need to be told, can we do that in China? No, we can't. So you show some respect here. That's how I feel about it.